Welcome back to the podcast, Aging Queen. My name is Louis Canetti, and I'm here again with James from Columbus, Ohio. He's our regular guest. Hello, James.
Hey,
How are you?
good. How are you?
Good, good. So I wanted to bring you back on the show. First thing, because I think you're lovely and you're always a good chat. I think there's a topic that you could help us out with.
Sure.
And I want to call this episode "Migration of the Gays," basically, because I feel there's been a lot of movement, especially since the pandemic, with things being so expensive.
hmm
Um, a lot of gay people, gay men, lesbians, anyone on the queer spectrum, have migrated from that typical San Francisco, New York hubs into smaller cities, or even living abroad or the countryside.
hmm
So yeah, tell me a little bit about friends you know or the feeling you get. Are you aching to buy that cottage home outside of Columbus and leave the city behind?
If some of my best friends had their way, I would be buying a house in Austin, Texas, because it seems like
Oh.
several of the people who I consider like best friends have left larger cities and have moved to Austin, which has just
Mhm.
been crazy. Um, I personally don't have any plans of moving to Austin anytime soon. Um, Even though I will be visiting soon for sure, I don't have any plans of living there though.
My sister lived in Austin
Yeah.
for 14 years, and she saw it change completely. She's now living abroad, but when she was there, it was a very small town. I used to visit. I saw the differences. And towards the end, just the downtown became like a little Manhattan. Everything just got so pricey. When I used to go visit her in the early 2000s, there were a, there was a lot more character. I remember the first thing that I saw that made me realize that Austin is weird, which is a good thing, was there was this guy on a bicycle in a thong. That's all he was wearing, and just bicycling through Midtown basically, or downtown, as it is there, and no one was bothering him. Everyone was just it's copacetic. It was kind of like a hippie town. Now it's a little corporate. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like with places like Austin, it's essentially that that whole like tech bubble.
Yeah,
Tech moved in and all the tech jobs went there, and of course with that you've got all of the employees. Going back, I guess, to the original subject of gays migrating, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people I found, um, especially a lot of people who lived in the bigger cities, were finding, of course, that they were expensive. Like I know when I lived in San Francisco, it was expensive, and that was 20 years ago. I can only imagine
oh gosh, yeah.
what it is now. And so, of course, if you've got a situation where you're paying some crazy amount of money in rent or mortgage, um, if you're if you want perhaps a slower pace of life, um, a lot of people, or quite honestly, just to save money, a lot of people move back home. So like there were plenty of people who moved, let's say, back to Columbus or back to live with their parents during the pandemic because they couldn't afford living in the bigger cities,
Yeah,
and
I mean, I
places
was
like,
I was dating someone who actually
yeah,
did that. He was in his 30s, and he's like, "Hey, I just moved to West Hollywood, and there's nothing here. Nothing's open. So I want to go save money and live with my folks for a while." I said, "Oh, like, go ahead."
exactly. And places like Columbus are, well, I should say Columbus is very affordable. Like when I first moved here, Columbus was abs it was just cheap. Like I remember seeing advertisements for apartments that were like 1,000 square foot apartments for like $500 or $600. Not you're not going to see that now, but um, it was just crazy to me. Like thinking back on that. Um, I will say there are certain things that are definitely cheaper here in Columbus. Like I feel like um, just cost of living is cheaper here in Columbus than it is in a larger city. Like
Right.
when I go and see friends in bigger cities, like Seattle, Chicago, Austin, New York, DC. I'm fascinated by how much I have to pay for certain things,
Oh yeah.
you know. And and here of course it's just kind of like, well, I definitely like friends are shocked when I take them out to, a restaurant or a bar, and they're just like, "Wow, that's it? That's all I have to pay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, the drink is not $20 here. The drink is,
Well, they're just yeah,
8, 7 or
it's
8,
ridiculous. And you have
Yeah.
another thing called the gay poor too, so right?
Yes. The gay pour is definitely a thing
It
here in gay
exists.
bars,
Yeah.
and it's even stronger if you know your bartender for sure. And
Explain to our audience who might not know what the gay poor is. I've experienced it since 21, basically.
I would say like my favorite experience with the gay pour actually happened in San Francisco.
And it's POUR, not gay
Yes.
poor.
Yes, yes, POUR, like as in they're pouring you a drink.
Mhm.
My friends and I went to this very old gay bar, and it was very small, and it was, an older clientele, but it was the only gay bar in the financial district at the time. And at the time my drink was, I loved an apple martini. And so of course, being the young gay, I ordered a Grey Goose apple martini, and the older bartender, he was like, great. He,
Appletini.
he 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 said Grey Goose apple martini, and then I repeated it, and he repeated it, and so I was like, awesome. So he proceeds to get a shaker, and he gets ice, and he puts, and then he gets the bottle of Grey Goose, and I just watch him as he pours this Grey Goose
Mhm,
vodka. He's just pouring and
mhm. It
pouring
just keeps
and
going.
pouring and pouring, and he literally pours so much vodka that it starts to overflow.
My
And then I
goodness.
looked, and then I looked at him and I said, "Apple." And he was like, "Oh." So then he puts the top of the shaker on,
Hey,
and
yeah,
and you
so
know how the tops have like strainers built into them.
right.
So he gets apple pucker and just kind of he fills the rest of it with apple pucker. So it's like
You get a little
not even
spritzer.
not even a shot of
My
apple
goodness.
pucker. And of course he shakes it, puts it in a chilled martini glass, and it is straight up vodka with a
You know,
with
it's
a
appreciated though when drinks are 15, $20.
right.
Getting that little gay pour,
Well,
people
I
are
mean, honestly, even here, like, when I go out with friends, we go to certain bars, and we know which bars, of course, have the stronger pours, and you'll watch the bartenders, and they'll make the pour, and you look at the glass, and it's a pint glass usually,
mm,
and sure, it has ice in it, but I would say if you did a simple drink like Jack and Coke, I would say 70 to 80% of your drink is going to be alcohol.
yeah, it's
And
called
then
jacked up in Coke
yeah,
because
and
it
then,
has a lot of Jack.
and then the rest will be the filler. So that's a gay pour. It's just a very heavy-handed pour.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
that's why a lot of, straight folks also like going to gay bars because it's, a
true.
little bit more lax on the liquor
Well,
pour.
and that's honestly one of the things I can say about, what, like, kind of going back to the original concept of
Mm,
a topic of, like living in a, you know, in a smaller place, or like maybe a Midwest compared to like a major city,
yeah, smaller
is
town,
a
city.
smaller town. In this instance, like a drink like that in New York is going to cost you $20, or even in DC, it's going to cost you what, like $16 or something
Oh,
like that.
it's ridiculous, yeah.
Here in Columbus, that drink is going to cost you $7 or $8.
You guys are basically living in the '90s, let's just admit it.
I mean,
It's great.
I wouldn't say we're living in the 90s, because housing prices obviously went up everywhere, including here in Columbus.
Oh, yeah.
Especially like with interest rates being what they are. Like most people that I know, if you bought a house during the pandemic, then that's awesome because, of course, like, that's when things are a little cheaper. But now, of
You got
course,
foresight, yeah.
interest rates are higher, which means mortgage rates are higher, which means, and then of course, like, rent is also higher. But it really kind of depends. Like for the most part, obviously rent is going to be cheaper here in Columbus than it is going to be in one of those major cities.
Right,
Like, I have friends from New York who've come to visit, and back when I had a two-bedroom apartment, for years I lived in a two-bedroom apartment here in Columbus in a very good neighborhood, uh, and my rent was 575 a month, and no one could believe that I was paying 575 for a two-bedroom apartment. That apartment is now, since I've left it, it's gone up a little bit, but I don't think it's gone up too terribly much. Um, but
well,
my
the thing
friends
is,
would see that and they would be like,
yeah,
"There's no way you would ever find that in, like, New York or
right.
DC or something like that." Yeah.
Well, what's making things so crazily expensive? I think a lot of people are making more money. I think these tech jobs, for instances, are paying quite well. Government's paying quite well, but it's not all trickling down. And still, just to have a regular job, let's say as a marketing director, you're not going to make in most places over 100,000, and that's really what you need now. um, as a
Right.
single person is for sure over 100,000. But I've seen some figures of anywhere on the coast, and especially in the Northeast or in California, Seattle, all those Oregon, um, the West Coast for sure is to be single. The burden falls on you completely, and the burden times two, meaning it's life is set up for a double income. So it's not just, oh, you get to save now. No, the minimum now is basically a double income. It's 250, 300,000 to live like a normal person.
True.
Um, like a family of two, especially, you're gonna need to make 300,000 a year. And these figures are just astronomical. It's ridiculous, and
And I
stressful just to get there.
and I feel like it's definitely lower, um, outside of those areas.
Yes.
Um, for sure. I mean, like I said, if you were fortunate enough to get in on that market when during COVID, whenever, well, I guess when interest rates were low, then yeah, everything, like, if you bought a house, your mortgage payments are going to be cheaper than if you tried to buy a house today. Like, from a Columbus point of view, obviously, I we're our cost of living isn't that high. Like, you don't have to make $300,000 to be able to live comfortably here. Obviously, that's most certainly not the case.
Here's an article that I just saw, or I just read on from ABC 7 in New York, WABC. It says a
Mhm.
family of four needs to make at least $318,406 a year to live comfortably in New York City, according to a new report. That's a family of four.
Yeah.
Now, a single person living in New York City to live comfortably needs to make $138,570 per year.
And then I
That's a
guess my
lot.
question would be, like, what does that get you? You know,
I don't know. I don't know.
because
Is it worth it? Let's say you get that job, and I've lived in New York City, and you work 18, 20 hours. It's not having lived all over and lived in Europe where it's a little bit more livable and comfortable in that sense. If you're making 138,000 in New York City, you're working a hell of a lot. You're not there
right,
really to enjoy the city. So
right,
where do you spend that money? Sometimes you can save it, but you're also going to spend it on convenience and luxuries because you don't have time. So the dog walker, a lot of to go or deliveries, it all adds up in a city where everything walking outside the door is $100.
right. Whereas now, I mean, I know for a fact that rent here in Columbus has gotten way more expensive.
Hmm.
So even though Columbus is what I would consider it not not an expensive place to live as far as cost of living. I know there are rents in Columbus that are over $2,000 a month, which in my mind is confusing because I
Right.
think this is Columbus, Ohio. Why would anyone ever want to pay that much in rent? But it also boils down to, of course, location. Like everything boils down to location. Um, am I personally, would I want to live somewhere in Columbus where the rent was that much? No, because in my mind, that's just too expensive for Columbus.
But let's
But
let's 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 bring this back.
mhm.
So you moved to Columbus also because East Coast and the West Coast got too expensive, and we found really good.
No, I
No?
like I was like most gay people. I moved somewhere for a guy. I
Oh,
mean,
that's right, you did, yeah.
yes, I mean that's what it boiled down to. I met someone. At the time, I was living in Washington, D.C., and wasn't really enjoying my life in Washington, D.C. And he basically said, well, why not try Columbus? And I had never lived in Columbus, I'd never lived in Ohio. And I was like, you know what? There's nothing keeping me in Washington, D.C., so sure, why not? And so I moved to
And
Columbus,
you only
Ohio.
knew this one guy, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and it was definitely, looking back on it, it was kind of like, man, that was definitely risky. Um, but overall, it was a good move.
But
Like
you're not with the guy now. How long did that last?
no, yeah,
Why'd you end
no.
up staying?
Oh my. Yeah, we didn't. Gosh, did we? Uh, we are still friends. He
Mhm,
actually no longer. He's done a lot since we broke up so many years ago because that was quite a long time ago.
mhm.
Um, I stayed honestly because it was just kind of like at the time I had I had turned I was 30 when I moved here, and um, I've realized that as you get older, it's harder to just pick up and move somewhere, you
Oh,
know,
I know.
because it's just kind of like there's a lot that it's hard. Like starting over at 30, okay, that's fine. Starting over at 47,
It's
that
still you can still do it, and a lot of people are doing it,
you
and
can do it, but
but it's harder. It's
it's
harder.
much harder. Like the situation has to be right. Like I
Or you need more. For instance, at 30,
right.
you can go with literally a suitcase and a couple bucks in your pocket,
Really,
or
that's
like
true.
that.
Yes.
Now it's like you've got stuff to either sell or unload or
Oh yes.
move. You got
Yes.
pets,
Yes. Like when I moved to Columbus, Columbus was the first apartment that I'd ever had that was just my apartment.
Right.
And it was like I didn't have furniture.
Your
I had
abode.
never like I had always lived with roommates or boyfriends, and here I am. I'm 30 years old. I have my very first apartment. I don't and the first thing I have to do is I have to get stuff to put in my apartment.
Mhm.
And my apartment at the time, I absolutely loved it. It was this old Victorian house, and I had the top floor. So my floor was basically this, two bedrooms, and I had this, big living room, and it was amazing. And I remember when I first moved to Columbus, it was gosh, it was 2007. It was right before I turned 31,
Mhm.
and I remember my rent was $695.
No, those were the good days.
Yeah, like it was just like this, and it was just massive, and I loved it. But at the same time, I needed a roommate, so I lived the first year there by myself, and then after that, I got a roommate. Um, but now I think I know that same apartment now is over $1,000. I know
Yeah,
that much.
I'm sure. Even Columbus has gone up. I remember when
Oh
I
yeah,
moved
yeah.
to New York to Brooklyn in 2001, we had a huge three-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
and my portion was 330 for my room. So imagine that's 23 years ago.
Yeah.
That apartment is probably 5 grand now, at least,
Oh, I'm sure.
or more.
For sure.
But
But
um, but yeah. So to go back, okay. So typically, gay men, for instance, or would go. into a bad part of the city
Mhm.
and invest
Gentrified? Yeah.
yeah, invest in, let's say, like, some type of, you know, row house or apartment that was kinda
Mhm.
dilapidated, and, would fix it up, you know?
Yeah.
And in doing so, others would come, and then that neighborhood, would become pretty fashionable, and then that became kind of like the neighborhood. That's happened in Philadelphia and DC with DuPont. It's happened in Chelsea in New York, the Castro, everywhere really. Um, do you see that that's happening in the smaller cities now with the migration of the gays?
Sure.
Now,
Sure.
are they
It's
still
still
going into undesirable neighborhoods and kind of making new neighborhoods?
yes, and I mean, I've seen that happen here in Columbus, for instance. Like, we have, there's some neighborhoods that are, you know, 10 years ago, you would never wanna live in this neighborhood. I mean, 10 years ago, you could literally buy a four-bedroom house in this neighborhood for $30,000
Oh
because,
man,
because no one, it wasn't a popular neighborhood.
right?
But, you had gays and other investors who've gone into those neighborhoods, bought some of those properties and started fixing them up to the point where now some of those same houses that might have been $30,000 10 years ago are
Over a
now
million.
close to it.
Yeah.
So here in Columbus, I've definitely seen it. I've seen it happen in several neighborhoods here, um,
But have
where
they created a specific neighborhood now that's kind of like a secondary neighborhood, or is it just
so
everyone's on their own?
here in Columbus, we don't have a specific gay neighborhood.
Mhm,
So I guess, like, in your mind, you might be thinking of something like the Castro in San Francisco, where
mhm,
you've got it's a mostly gay community and gay businesses and gay restaurants and bars and things like that. Here in Columbus, we don't have that.
mhm.
Like, in my neighborhood, for instance, there are a lot of pride flags on houses when you drive through my neighborhood, which is amazing, and I love that.
That's great.
Um, and it's a very gay friendly neighborhood, but I would not say it's a gay neighborhood in the sense that um, there's not a lot there's not a lot to do in my neighborhood. So even though there are plenty of gay people in my neighborhood, there's no way of people sort of like interacting unless you
And your
literally walk
neighborhood's
around,
also
you
your
know.
neighborhood's also kind of like an old school suburban. It's one of these older, right,
It's not it's not
pre-war.
it's not suburban, but because it is in the city for
It's
sure.
in the
But
city, but,
yeah,
there are houses, right? So you walk,
yes,
you can't
yes.
really
This
go
is
to a
a
strip of bars.
Right, there are no bars nearby. Like, there's no bars within walking distance per se. Like, and that's the thing. Like, that's what I was saying. Like, there's not really a way of really connecting all of the gay people in this area. You know.
Right.
Um,
Well, that's just the way that a lot of these, especially in Middle America, these cities have been constructed,
mhm.
or reinvented. Because before World War II, a lot of them had trams and real downtowns,
Right,
and then they changed to make way for the car, basically.
right. I mean, basically, for us, like, if for my neighborhood specifically, if I wanted to make friends with them within like other gays in my neighborhood, I would literally have to walk around and
Or you could
say
play
hi.
paddle. You could join the local or start a paddle team. Have you played paddle?
Paddle.
It's called. Oh, look at me. I'm thinking so European. Because I have a lot of Spanish friends. They call it paddle. It's called pickleball. Paddles in
Oh,
Europe. Pickleball is called paddle. Soccer, football, that kind of thing.
that's very funny because I've heard plenty of people talking about pickleball, not gay people, mostly other like friends and coworkers have talked about pickleball, and I don't think I've only seen it in videos. I've never actually seen it played, but
I've played it.
um,
I think it's great. But what's wrong with tennis? Like it's the same thing. It's just a shorter smaller version of tennis. I guess it's great for aging queens, but a
I
lot of young
mean,
people are really getting into it.
for me, it's not something that I personally would do, but I will say, like, as far as, like, the gay community in my neighborhood, I know some of the gay people who live in my neighborhood. It's really just a matter of um, contacting people and just making something happen.
Yeah.
Because like one of my really good friends, he's moving. He's buying a house, maybe a block and a half away from me, and I'm so
Oh, that's
excited
great.
because, like, he's just like, yeah, when I buy my house, we can hang out. And I'm like, yes. And then I know someone like one of my um, former coworkers. He and his husband have a house somewhere near me. I think within a 2 block radius. I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere near me, and it's just a matter of reaching out and saying, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Let's hang out." And
Yeah.
and
So,
that's
so we
that's
migrate from other cities.
yeah,
We still want a sense of community,
yeah,
whether it be uh, the kind of typical thing we've done in history where it's going into an urban setting and cleaning it up and making it into a neighborhood, or uh, maybe a little bit more residential in smaller towns, but you still have that sense of community where gays are joining the group, meaning they are creating a little community there that might have not existed beforehand. You know,
I mean, I feel like
that makes
that's
sense.
I feel like that's the goal for just people in general, is to find their community or create their community. Um, because as much as I know for me, like I am single and live alone, and I lead a pretty solitary life, but at the same time, I also need my community. I need my
Right.
friends, like they provide so much for just to in my life. They just provide so much to me.
I think the
Um,
pandemic showed us how much we need
oh
people.
yes, for sure, exactly. So, so one of the things that I find interesting is that, yeah, I do have friends here, but like I said, most of like my very best friends don't live here. So
Right.
when I go and see them, either they come see me or I go see them. Um, which is perfectly fine because, as you know, I love to travel. Um, but in doing that, it's sort of maintaining that community that you've created with those people.
Right. In
So
whatever kind of way you can, meaning
right,
structure wise,
exactly. So sometimes that means hanging
however
out
it
at somebody's
looks.
house or going to
Exactly.
bars or
Right.
or just doing like me and one of my very best friends. We were talking about the fact that when we uh, go and visit family, a lot of times we will literally just go and hang out with them, and we'll watch TV for a week. And
Right.
some people don't understand, like, why would you travel all that way to literally sit in front of a TV? And it's just like, this is what we're doing to
That's how you share
bond.
your time. Yeah.
That's how we
Yeah.
share our time, exactly. So, and that's and it's different for everybody,
Yeah.
and whatever works for you is great, just as long as it works.
As long as it works.
Mhm.
So our last topic that we can, or subtopic that we can discuss, because we only got a couple of minutes left on this episode,
Oh.
is what do you think about gays or gay couples or singles moving to the countryside? I have a friend that's lived in Philly almost 20 years, and him and his partner are moving 2.5 hours away, basically in the country.
Mhm.
They're, their closest neighbor is probably a 10-minute drive. Um, is this something that's appealing to you? Is this something that was born from the pandemic? Or is it, I don't know, uh, is it even safe to be because I think that a lot of what being with like-minded people brings safety in numbers. This is why we as humans, not just gay people, but we as humans live in cities. So moving to the countryside when you're a gay man or a gay couple, do you think it's safe? Do you think it's what's your opinion?
So I'm very fortunate in that I have lived in the mountains of North Carolina in a very rural area. I have
Hmm.
lived in the heart of San Francisco, so like in the heart of the city. So I've been able to see the advantages of both. Um, and honestly, it boils down to your preference because, like me, there are certain aspects of living in a city that I miss. Like, I remember when I lived in San Francisco, one of the things that was incredibly comforting was when I went to bed at night, just the sound of the city would
Oh,
sort of
yeah, I
like
remember that in New
put
York,
me to
yeah,
sleep, you know?
right,
But then, of course, when I was living in San Francisco, I missed the sound of the country. In that instance,
right.
I missed the sound of like the grasshoppers and the bugs outside, and the cicadas, like I missed that noise. So I could honestly, for me, I guess it really kind of depends. Like obviously I could do either one. Now if I was married and happy and things like, I mean, not I'm happy now, but I suppose like if I was
Married and happy.
married, and and we wanted to do that as a couple, awesome. Um
I think
as
it's
a
a little it's more alluring when you're aging or you're getting older.
well,
There's more of a tendency to get that garden and that house. I don't like suburbia, but a nice little country house, sounds great if you have
and
someone to share it with.
and see, that's the thing, like there are other people that I've met who are quite the opposite. They're like house, country house, no, no, no. They want condo in the middle of
Right.
downtown, which also makes sense. It really depends on the person,
Yeah.
So like for me, I honestly I for me, I would probably have to decide in the moment because as I've
Mhm.
gotten older, my tastes and my needs have changed. So right
That's
now I
that's where I'm getting at too,
right.
is
So like right now I have a house.
Mhm.
I love my house. But I realize at some point in time, because I have a two-story house. So at some point in time, I might not be able to walk up and down the stairs as easily,
Well,
you
I mean,
know.
come on, that's many years from now, but
True. It's actually kind of funny when I bought my house. That's one of the things that my mom pointed out. She's like, at some point you might consider having
a
just a house
Rambler.
that's one floor that just has one floor so that you don't go up and down the stairs.
I'm
Um,
experiencing that with my parents now. They have a 2 level, and it's hard for my mom to go up.
right, exactly.
But
So
that comes for us all, as we
right.
age.
So like as I get older, it might get to the point where I'm gonna downsize and just get a condo. But for right now, I'm perfectly happy with my house.
Would you live in the countryside, James? Alone?
Um, it really depends on the situation.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not gonna say no because I've done it. But the time I did it, I had a boyfriend.
Mhm.
Um,
It's easier if you're with someone, but single, I think it would be harder for me.
well, I guess the only challenge is for instance, being single and living on your own in a city. You can look out the window and you can see people,
Right.
or
And you can interact quickly
you
with
can
people.
interact exactly. Like living in the country, because like as I said, like I could go outside and not see anyone for quite a while. Um, and at the time it was okay, you know, because it definitely had its positive points and a few
Mhm.
negatives. Um, I would most certainly consider moving back there for sure. Like I love the mountains of North Carolina,
Right.
um, and there's so many parts about it that are just appealing.
Mhm.
So would I move there? Sure. Am I going to? No,
Yeah.
no.
I think everything's harder when you're alone in the sense of when moving because we are social beings and we want to interact and also date. So I think
Yes,
for me, it's is a single person. It'd be hard to move to the countryside alone, but the
yes.
desire is there, the daydreaming is there, the beauty of nature and all that it comes with. That
And that is definitely like,
learning.
especially like in talking about like dating, that is definitely something else to consider.
Oh yeah,
Like those types of moves. There's so much to consider. There's the romantic, there's the financial, there's just all kinds of things, like where are you going to get your food?
Right.
Just like all these
You
things
hate
are
driving 'cause a lot of people stay in the city because they don't like
exactly,
to drive. Yeah.
exactly, so it's kind of like there's so many different things to consider. So that's why I said for me, it's a lovely idea, but it's definitely not something that I'm going to do anytime soon. Like I'm not moving to the country anytime soon.
Oh,
I don't
you
think that
enjoy
happening.
that house and those 2 levels of yours and keep going up and down until you can't.
Yes, that's the goal.
There you go. Well,
Yes.
lovely having you on the show again, James.
Thank you. Thanks
Um,
for having me.
as always, a good chat. And that concludes this episode, guys. Please subscribe and like, and you can hear our show anywhere that podcasts air. So thanks again. And James, we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later.